And so here we are, the Festival of All Saints, and everything is kind of topsy-turvy this morning. First off, it started off with changing our clocks, right? And that's nothing like that to kind of get the day started, right? What time is it really? Am I late? Am I early? Did I get extra sleep or didn't I? Well, there's that. We have a new videographer at the back today, sort of debuting with us. We have new sort of acolytes with us today. We have readings that didn't even appear in the bulletin. We had to look up the psalm ourselves. And such is life. But what a beautiful day. What a beautiful day to remember our loved ones who have now found themselves in the nearer presence of God. And oh, by the way, make it stop, please, turn it off. Have you had enough of political ads? Isn't it interesting that this week, one out of every two people, every other person, no matter what happens this week with the election, one half are going to be disappointed in the results. Isn't that astounding? And so what is it that the gospel might say to us this day? How might this gospel create in us something to hope for? How might this gospel speak to me personally? I did have to laugh. I felt so anxious about election stuff that I went and voted early. I wasn't going to because I love to go to the polls and kind of see other people and hang out a little bit. But only in America. So it was Halloween. It was Thursday. I went to the city hall. I voted. And I got a peanut butter cup. Life is good. So, here we have this passage, this familiar passage, the story of the raising of Lazarus. And it's so dramatic. It really does call to be read in different parts. And I wonder if by doing that, you may be identified with one of those characters in there, perhaps more so than if I had just read it to you. I don't know. But let's just take a quick survey of all those characters. First of all, there's Mary, whose heart is brimful of grief, right? And she calls out in this kind of accusatory way, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." That's what grief does to us, doesn't it? It rips us apart. And we can sometimes lash out at others because we feel life is so unfair. And so I wonder if maybe Mary might represent those of us who come to church today remembering departed loved ones. And particularly for some of those whose grief of loss is so fresh that they're at the point of being overwhelmed, just like Mary. Or maybe Martha. Now, Martha asked the exact same question only moments earlier and then witnessed her question and grief transformed into this courageous confession. "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And then later makes this very particular confession in Jesus. The one who tarried, the one who didn't get there on time, while her brother died, yet who promised her life eternal, life here and now. "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Perhaps Martha stands for all those whose faith in Jesus seems incredibly resilient and who serve as encourages to you and to me. Or maybe our focus was on Lazarus, the one who was called forth from the tomb. Lazarus stands as that promise of Jesus literally embodied, the one whom death had taken but could not hold on to. And Lazarus serves as a testimony to Jesus' power over death, and each of us who have met people who have overcome extraordinary circumstances, very difficult circumstances, they may well be a contemporary Lazarus to us. And of course, there's Jesus, the one who gives life, the one who calls us out of death, as well as our fear of death. He is the one who weeps for Lazarus. I love this. Isn't it a great scene? He shows up late. He comes in, and everybody's weeping. And he simply weeps with them. With Lazarus, with the sisters of Lazarus, with all the other the people standing by. And he is the one in raising Lazarus, starts this whole chain of events that will lead to his own death. He is the one, finally, in whom death itself cannot contain. I am resurrection and I am life. We begin every funeral service with those words. Jesus promises Martha earlier in the story and then demonstrates this truth, this fidelity, if you will, by raising Lazarus, and then helps us, I think, understand the fresh import of the promise of resurrection life. It stands at the center of every Sunday celebration, and especially on this festival of All Saints. Resurrection life is at the center of our lives as followers of Jesus. And there's, one other character in there. Actually, it's a whole group of characters. The crowd who witness the raising of Lazarus and whom Jesus commands, what's he say to them? Unbind him. It's very direct. Unbind him and let him go. Jesus doesn't go over and unwrap the grave clothes. He says, you unbind him. And I find this part of the story particularly compelling because it reminds me that even God's work of resurrection isn't quite complete without our participation, without our being caught up in the act itself. It's not that God needs us to do God's work of resurrection. It's really that God's work of resurrection isn't limited. It's not simply for the one who's being raised. It's for those onlookers. It's for the crowd. It's for all of us. It catches up to us, transforms us as we are finding ourselves drawn into the story. Unbind him and let him go. Well, this is an invitation drawing us into God's life-giving work, to participate in, to extend, if you will, the reach of God's mighty acts. It is a promise that resurrection is not simply a matter of then, but is also a matter of right now. Now there's something to do. Now we find courage to live life even in the middle of confusing and fearful times. Now we sense God's promise of life helping us not only to live in the shadow of death with confidence, but to resist that power of death. It reminds me of how much we can be shut down when we live in fear. It reminds me of one of the great saints of the church, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He's a saint in the truest sense. And you may remember that in 1986, I know some of you were not even born then, but Tutu, I still remember it to this day. Tutu was preaching in the cathedral in Johannesburg. He was surrounded by the police and soldiers. They came into the church, into the cathedral, and they kind of lined the walls, and the congregation wasn't quite sure what was going to happen. And Bishop Tutu was preaching about resurrection nonetheless. And outside, he knew there was even a larger contingent of military personnel there to simply keep the peace. They were bracing for possible racial violence on this 10th anniversary of the uprising in Soweto. And if any of you have seen either a clip or known Bishop Tutu, here he is in the pulpit, looking at these armed people around the room, the congregation paralyzed in fear. Since you have already lost, I invite you today to come join the winning side. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And the atmosphere became electric. The soldiers didn't know what to do or what to make of it. And the congregation itself was transformed by Tutu's challenge. They leapt to their feet and they began dancing and praising God. And there they go, dancing down the aisle, out of the cathedral, into the streets to meet the police and the military forces. And the police and the military simply, it's like the parting of the Red Sea. They just backed up and they let them through. That's the power of resurrection life, of living in the resurrection. It knows no bounds. And maybe it doesn't quite stack up to Desmond Tutu, but I think I had a glimpse of it last week. Last week, as we had that conversation in the parish hall about our bell tower and kind of trying to figure out what do we do next. It was the vulnerable and open and honest conversation. Everyone had a turn. Everyone spoke their mind. And you know what? It was like peeling a strip of cloth off Lazarus, of unbinding Lazarus, that we might find our way. Unbind him and let him go. God's promise of resurrection isn't an invitation, of course, to deny death. Death is very real, and life is hard. And you know what? The death rate in our community is still 100%. God's promise of resurrection does, however, grant us the power to defy that power of death that it can have over us, that paralyzing effect, that binding effect, to defy death's ability to overshadow and distort our lives, right? Sometimes we don't act because we are so frightened. We can find our own futures distorted in a way because we are afraid to deny death's threat, that there's nothing else, right? That's often a common thing. People say, oh, that's so sad. and there's nothing else. We as believers in a community of faith, know this is not the end. We have read the end of the book. We know there is more to this story. And you know what? We're part of that. We're part of that unfolding story of God's life of redemption in the world. This Easter story, this one of raising of Lazarus, prefigures the Easter story. And it promises that death does not have the last word, and that we are free now to live now, to struggle now, to sacrifice now, to encourage others now, to live out of a place of love rather than hate, and to have our actions directed by hope. What a difference. What a gift we have to offer the world. In light of God's resurrection promise, death doesn't terrify us. Not the death of loved ones that we remember this day, nor our own. Because of God's resurrection promise, the life we share in this world here and now no longer can hold us down. Storms and natural disasters of unprecedented magnitude, the massacre of innocents in war-torn countries, the politics of fear and division, the rhetoric of hate, these are heart-wrenching elements of life in our world. That's just the way the world is. And they are not the last word. That's the story of resurrection. Prompted by God's promise of resurrection, we know there's another way. And we can both stand against these things, to hold on to each other in the middle of these things, and to offer a testimony that's rooted in life and love that runs contrary to the testimony of the world. So today, after giving thanks for those saints who have gone before us and who are now in the nearer presence of God, we turn our attention more directly to the saints sitting beside us, or in front of us, or behind us. We who have heard the word of resurrection, we are called to unbind all those who are bound by fear and death and give them release. Release those who struggle to find hope. God, who raised Jesus from the dead, invites us to participate in, to extend, and to even complete God's resurrection work by caring for and standing with and lending our courage to those who are suffering and grieving, those who are most vulnerable and in need. And so we already have all that we need. God has given us what we need. And we've got some footprints appearing on the wall, walking in the way of Jesus. People have made pledges to support the work of Christ in the coming year here at St. Thomas. We have a veritable host of saints who have work to do, a call to answer, a resurrection life to lead here, now. Unbind him. Let him go. That's our mandate. For the God who answered Jesus' prayer in bringing Lazarus forth from the tomb, the God who raised Jesus from death, the God who promises us eternal life, this God is not finished yet. This God has yet more to give. And we are those instruments of God's resurrection, life, and grace, and power right here and right now. I invite us to stand to renew our baptismal promises.